Here we go. This is ThinkTech Talks in the 4 to 5 block, where we talk about agri-tech in Hawaii. And today we're talking about new directions in open ocean aquaculture for Hawaii with Neil Sims, the old man of the sea, I suppose, in Kona. And he's with Kampachi Farms. And he is a longtime entrepreneur in open ocean aquaculture, a pioneer. Welcome to the show, Neil. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jay. That's quite an introduction. Old man of the sea, lots of old there, yes. Been at this for quite a while. The better part of my life, you might say.
I think so. We have a picture of you, which we'll use when you speak. We're on Skype with Neil, but we have audio rather than audio and video, but I think that's just fine. So Neil, tell us about how you got involved in open ocean aquaculture. What are the things that happened to you? What are the revelations that occurred to you that brought you to where you are today? We only have 50 minutes for this show, so try to calculate your answer accordingly.
There you go. But sure, Jay, my involvement in open ocean aquaculture really is a matter of necessity, as it is for the planet. We need to figure out how to grow the seafood that we love, that we can't continue just to hunt down wild seafood any more than we could continue to hunt down woolly mammoths or bison or passenger pigeons. My personal history, I grew up in Australia, as you might be able to guess from the accent, and I was literally 1.5 stone throws away from the beach we lived. So I spent most of my idle youth on the beach, in the water, or on the water, and knew that that's what I wanted my career to be. I had a natural bent towards biology and just an inclination towards wanting to work with living organisms from an early age, from when I first had an ant farm in my bedroom and it fell over and broke. I had ants throughout my bedroom, much to my mother's consternation. And so at a young age, I went up to James Cook University, which at the time was Australia's premier marine biology university, up in the tropics, up in Townsville. Mm-hmm. I'd grown up just below Sydney, and so it was quite a revelation to go up to to Townsville and to realise that you don't have to actually put up with the temperate zone, that if you make your right life decisions, you can live in the tropics all your life. You don't have to put up with winter anymore. And spent 4 years at James Cook doing marine biology and fisheries, of which aquaculture at the time consisted of about half of one of the lecturers in fisheries biology. There was passing reference to aquaculture because there really wasn't any career path in that direction. There wasn't actually much of a career path in marine biology.
Can you give us a handle on what year you're talking about, Neil? Sorry I had to ask that.
Yeah. Late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
So that's putting the O in old, yeah. And so when I finished up, I took a stint for a couple of years as the Australian equivalent of Peace Corps in Australian volunteers abroad, and went and taught on an outer island in the Cook Islands for a couple of years. This was an island of 1,500 people, and I taught senior biology and chemistry and physics to kids that were desperate to get off the island. They wanted to get to university in New Zealand and make something of their lives. That was enjoyable, but wasn't really very challenging. At the end of that 2-year period, I went and travelled for a while and came back through Rarotonga and walked into the fisheries office there and said, I've got a fisheries biology degree and I speak the local language and I'll work for food. And they had said, great, you can be the fisheries research division. To which I was a little taken aback. I said, well, what do you want me to do? They said, we don't know, but we know we've always needed the fisheries research division, and you're it. Go away and write yourself a job description. And so there ensued I stayed there for another 6 years, and just had a tremendous time. They really loved the Cook Islands. If you or any of our listeners are interested in the South Pacific vacation, the Cooks are beautiful islands, really small, English-speaking predominantly, and just wonderful folk.
Mm-hmm.
But the challenge that I faced there is that most of the fisheries that we were trying to manage, it was fine for the subsistence fisheries. They were, the traditional fishery structure still worked fairly well there. But for the commercial fisheries, as soon as you put a dollar value on a common property resource, it became just really challenging to manage. And so for the pearl oyster fishery, mm-hmm. there, where people could go and they could rip an oyster out of the lagoon and they could kill it and they could sell the shell for $2 an oyster and sell it down through New Zealand. And that was really good money. Some guys there could make $300 a day. In the outer islands of the Cooks, that was a phenomenal amount of money. Mm-hmm. The only alternative was making copra, which is a miserable way to make a living. And so the pressure on the pearl shell fishery in these lagoons was very intense. And it didn't really matter what management measures you instilled, whether they're size limits or reserve areas or quotas. It was just people would go and fish as hard as they could for as long as they could. Even where we had very defined resources where we could go and we could do a stock assessment and we could have a very short harvest period time of just a couple of days for things like the trocus, which is a giant snail that grows on the reef, and it's again a pearly material. That was on one island there. You could go and count, get a survey of the trocus numbers, and then have individual quotas for each person as to what they should take. But it was still, as soon as you opened the gates, the rules were forgotten and it became mayhem. And I had this epiphany at the end of like the third or fourth year of doing this, and where it was just really clearly not working, that we had people selectively fishing inside the reserve area, which we were supposed to be protecting, but people said, well, we figured you made it a reserve area because that's where there'd be more trocus, so that's why we went and fished there. And at the end of this period, at one stage there, it was a couple of days after the trocus season had been closed, and I was really dejected. Again, it had been twice the volume of shell had been harvested as to what we had allotted in the quota. And I'm walking along the beach at sunset and really dejected, and come across this old man sitting on the beach there with a bunch of live trocus in his canoe. And I was really frustrated. As well as being in charge of management, we're also in charge of enforcement. And so I started to gather up his trocus and put them into our truck, and he started crying because this was, as he said, it's Tokomoni Kritsmati. It's his Christmas money. And I was saying, well, you knew the lagoon was closed. You knew you were breaking the rules here. We've got to confiscate these. And he got even more irate and turned to me and says, well, why did you close it? Why did you close it? There are still some left. And
that's interesting.
I was just speechless. That if that old man there, he was 80 years old at least, and if he didn't recognize the value in leaving some of the stock out there so that there'd be more trocus of the right size to harvest the next year, if he didn't recognize the importance of doing this, everybody buying into the management structures, then what hope have we got for the rest of the oceans and for the rest of the lagoons, and what hope have we got for the planet? We can't continue just to take from the oceans. We have to learn how to give back. We have to learn how to nurture that which we want. And so perhaps it wasn't quite the epiphany at that time, but in hindsight now, that moment there was emblematic, representative of what I felt there over that 6-year period there in the Cooks, where there was the firm hand of fate in the middle of my back pushing me towards, let's get trocus hatcheries going, let's get giant clam farming going, let's get pearl farming going. All of these areas, they were shellfish. We didn't have the technology. We didn't have a clue how to do the high-value marine fish, the tunas, the groupers, the snappers yet. But where the shellfish it was possible to be farming those, that was where we needed to focus our efforts rather than just trying to manage the wild stock. And it worked very well. As I said, the pearl shell fishery was very difficult to manage, but we transitioned that towards pearl farming, where instead of just selling an individual shell for $2, a farmer could nurture an oyster. He could implant it, or get a Japanese technician to come down and implant it with a pearl nucleus, nurture it for a couple of years, and then he could harvest the pearl. And at that time, the average price of a pearl in Tahiti, at the Tahiti auction, was around $85 a pearl. And he'd still have the oyster.
Mm-hmm.
And you could either put another pearl in it, or you could put it back into the wild so that it become part of the brood stock.
Mm-hmm.
This made so much sense. It was an absolute revelation. It wasn't without its conflicts, because for pearl farming, you're going from a hunter-gatherer culture there to a farming culture. And it was a very fractious process. It was family splitting, village sundering. Those that were adamantly opposed to it the lagoon should remain open access, and those that recognized that we needed to move towards some more compartmentalized, tenured control of the lagoon. It was really a difficult process to go through. But by the time I left there at the end of 1988, several of those pearl farmers were well on the way to developing very viable businesses, and there had been, in the last couple of years, there'd been a real flourishing of pearl farms throughout the lagoon, and many of those pearl farmers went on to earn millions of dollars off their pearls
Really?
over the next couple
So
of
is
years.
that when you left for Hawaii in 1998?
I went back to Australia and did a year of graduate work at the University of New South Wales,
Mm-hmm.
and then was casting around for where could I go and use my pearl oyster expertise in an area that had need, and was approached by Pat Takahashi and a number of people that were working with Governor Ariyoshi
Mm-hmm.
and others that were interested in culturing the Japanese pearl oyster here at the Natural Energy Lab of Hawaii, and that's what brought me to Hawaii, was
How
to work with
interesting.
that company there.
How interesting.
And I started work at the Natural Energy Lab in 1990, and I have worked here ever since. This place is an absolute gem, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not given enough credit. This is for somebody such as myself with a marine biology passion and an entrepreneurial inclination. This place is a playground, an incubator, it's a nursery, it's a place where you can spread your wings and grow, and there's no other place like this on the planet. Hawaii should be very, very proud of the Natural Energy Lab and what it does and what it offers.
What have you done there? I mean, what was the origin of Kampachi Farms, and what is Kampachi Farms doing now?
I'd originally, I'd worked for a couple of years with the Japanese pearl oyster company, Hawaii Cultured Pearls, and then I'd wanted to work more in the black pearl oyster that is found throughout the South Pacific, and that's a really high-valued pearl. And there was a need there for hatchery technology to supply lagoons where the oysters had been overfished, and there are a number of lagoons. Pearl and Hermes Reef, for example, once supported a very, very large population of pearl oysters. Over 100 tons of pearl shell were taken out of Pearl and Hermes in 1929. That was another one of those examples of a fishery that lasted for about 4 months. By the time they got a biologist over here to go and do a stock assessment, the oysters were gone. And so the lagoons of the South Pacific, there are myriad stories like this, Jay, throughout the South Pacific where pearl oysters have been wiped out, where giant clams have been wiped out, and increasingly now where there's greater pressure on fish stocks as well. But our interest was in developing hatchery technology so that we could go down and repopulate lagoons throughout the South Pacific and develop pearl farming in lagoons where there was where oysters were not as common. And so my business partner, Dr. Dale Sava, he did his PhD at University of Hawaii in the late 70s, and he and I met here in Kona and we started kicking ideas around. We founded Black Pearls Incorporated. We started here at the Natural Energy Lab. We had total capitalization for that company of it was around $4,000. I think it was $4,200. It was all the cash that we could scrape together to put into a hat. And we started renting a little 10-foot by 10-foot area in a wet lab here at the Natural Energy Lab. And we grew from there. We did work we were pioneering with pearl oyster hatchery and pearl farm development work in the Marshall Islands, in the Philippines. We were involved in a pearl farm in Australia, and we were also assisting in development of a pearl farm in Thailand. It was a great time to be working in pearl oysters, except we were probably around 10 years too late. By the time we had the technology in hand and started to move forward with commercial pearl production in these areas, there was a flood of Chinese freshwater pearls coming onto the market, and the price of pearls had softened considerably. We had been applying for a permit. This was going to be the first pearl farm permit in Hawaii that was going to be in an area there of Kehi Lagoon. But as the price of pearls continued to drop, and we were going through this process to be farming the native Hawaiian pearl oyster, we would trundle a business plan around in front of the jewelers in Waikiki, and they'd look at us and chuckle, and they'd say, why would we do this when we can get all the black pearls we need out of Tahiti so cheaply?
Yes,
and so we have the technology to bring back the native Hawaiian. That was 98, 99.
Mm-hmm.
We have the technology now to bring back the native Hawaiian pearl oyster if it's needed, and I think there's an opportunity there for a public-private partnership at some stage to use this technology to bring the Hawaiian pearl oyster back. But there's not the economic engine there to really drive it, and that was
or the political will, for that matter. But Neil, hold a minute, because we're going to take a short break. This Neil Sims, he's an open ocean aquaculture entrepreneur for many years. And today's show, indeed, is New Directions in Open Ocean Aquaculture here on Agritech in the Islands. I'm Jay Fidell. We'll be right back after. Okay, this is ThinkTech, and one of our favorite shows is Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. And it goes 4 to 5 every Wednesday right here from ThinkTech in Pioneer Plaza at the core of downtown Honolulu. And my co-host is Ray Starling from Hawaii Energy. Ray, do you like the show?
I love the show. It's great to see all the new people coming in with new ideas about how to save energy, get us off of fossil fuel, and that's what it's all about. So Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, see us on Wednesday afternoons at 4 o'clock.
I knew he'd say that. Thanks, Ray. Okay, we're back. We're live with Neil Sims of Kampachi Farms in Kona at Nelha. He's an open ocean aquaculture entrepreneur for many years, and we're talking with him about new directions in open ocean aquaculture here on Agritech in Hawaii. So Neil, tell us about the what is Kampachi Farms, which is your current effort, and I guess sometime in the 2000 decade there, you put all your energy into that. What exactly does it do in terms of open ocean aquaculture?
Kampachi Farms, Jay, is focused on producing high-value marine food fish. As I've been explaining, that there was a softening in the pearl market, the black pearl market, the area that we were involved in. But my business partner and I at the time, Dale Sarv and I, we looked around at the seafood landscape, and we said, where is there a critical need for this hatchery technology that we've developed and the culture systems that we've developed? How could we adapt those to an area of really critical need? And food fish, particularly high-value food fish, was just clearly, hands down, far and away, the burning issue there. Where were we going to get more of the great-tasting seafood that we all crave? The snappers, the groupers, the yellowtails, the tunas, because there's just been increasing pressure on wild stocks. We've got a growing global population. They're increasingly affluent. They're increasingly health conscious. And as I had found early on in my career, it doesn't really matter what sorts of management regulations you put in place. There is just so much pressure on these high-value species that sooner or later something untoward, you're going to get imbalances in the food web, or you're going to get some other perturbation and the stock will crash. And it's a management challenge. People talk about, well, no, we're going to move, in fisheries management now, we're going to move towards multi-trophic management, managing a whole food web. Jay, we can't even manage single species stocks. What makes us think that we can go now and manage an entire food web in the ocean? We don't understand the complexities there.
So, the idea was that Hawaii had a special statute that permitted you to actually get a lease of open ocean, where you could grow, under controlled circumstances, controlled conditions, an ocean fish, and you could harvest that fish. And this is a new form of aquaculture entirely, because up to that point there wasn't a whole lot of that going on in the world. And aquaculture usually referred to ponds along the water, ponds inland, but not ponds in the open ocean. So somehow you got this act together. I mean, this is not an easy technological task. You actually got it together from a scientific point of view, from an equipment point of view, from a best practices point of view, and of course, from a permitting point of view. This was no small task. What was the greatest challenge in all of that?
I think it was the permitting, Jay, and let's give credit where it's due. John Corbin and his staff there at the Aquaculture Development Program were truly visionary in helping to rewrite the aquaculture leasing legislation. Randy Cates had started with the pilot project there with the submersible sea cages, the sea station, net pens, and the moi production out off Ever Beach.
Yeah.
There was a great coming together. People get frustrated with the political system here, but there was a wonderful coming together there in 97 and 98, where there was, at the legislature, there was broad recognition of the need to change the legislation to allow this industry to develop. And that was, together with John and Randy and myself, there was solid support from Bill Eilert, who's now the chairman of DLNR, and Senator Schatz, who at that stage was the chair of one of the committees that was reviewing this. And we spent a lot of time in the legislature talking to people and helping them understand it. There was recognition that this was an opportunity for Hawaii, that it built on the traditional fish pond technology that Hawaiian culture and Hawaiians had traditionally worked, but it took this, it married that tradition with new technologies and allowed it to move out into deeper water further offshore.
This is an extraordinary development in Hawaii, and it put us, at least theoretically, in a leadership position for the fact that we had the legislation and we had entrepreneurs like you who are actually implementing the legislation. But you said that it was a challenge, and I take it that you must mean that it was a challenge in terms of getting all the permitting, because the word is well known that getting an open ocean lease takes too long, and all the permits take too long. And without a strong stomach, an entrepreneur cannot wait that long to start business. How did you handle that?
We were very blessed to have the opportunity to take the time to talk to the community. It was we had at that stage a federally funded research program to develop the hatchery culture techniques for these species. And that was a 3-year grant. That was under an advanced technology program grant from NIST, which was a program that Senator Inouye had been a strong supporter of. It's since evaporated. But the ATP program, essentially, they gave us a chunk of money and gave us a firm push in the middle of the back and said, you've got 3 years. Go away, develop. You've convinced us that this is a critical bottleneck to an industry here in the U.S. Go and develop the technology that you need and go and build businesses. And so we, at the same time that we were developing the hatchery culture techniques and we were able to culture a range of species that had never been cultured in the hatchery before, or that had been cultured before only at small scale. We had alpaca pucker. We were successful at raising alpaca pucker, and ulua and roi, which although roi aren't much favoured, they are a great eating fish if you can grow them in captivity. And then also the Kampachi and other relatives of the Kampachi as well, the golden snapper. And so at the time, that 3-year research project that we had, where we were developing the technologies we needed for the hatchery to provide us with the fingerlings to grow offshore, we were also able to go very slowly and very carefully with the community and help people understand what we were trying to do. At that stage, it was very new. And it was, anything new is always scary. And I had seen this same difficulty in the Cook Islands in the transition from wild pearl shell to farmed.
Well, you find
to
people
pearl
have a
farming.
cultural connection with the sea in islands. And you find that they, of course, nobody likes anything new, actually. But you find that they have this kind of possessory feeling about whatever is in the ocean. Maybe it's more than just a feeling. Maybe it's a whole cultural sense of proprietorship about what's in the ocean. And customarily, they resist applications of yours of the nature that you were, seeking. And so I wonder, how you got by that, because we know that there have been difficult oppositions to open ocean leasing in the Big Island. Although it's the best place geographically to do it, it's not the best place culturally to do it. And you got through that. How did you get through it? I heard you say that, you spoke to the community, but, some people speak to the community and they don't get to first base. You managed to hit a home run.
Well, I think perhaps it was a base hit, Jay. But as Dale likes to say, we essentially talked people to death. And I think we had very compelling arguments on our side. I mean, let's look at where we are now, Jay. I mean, over 85% of U.S. seafood is imported, and over half of that is farmed. It's farmed in other places. We are eating lots of farmed seafood. It's just we have no control over the environmental standards or the farming standards that are applied to farms in other countries.
And therefore the quality of
the
quality of the fish.
the quality of the product, the impacts where essentially if there is a detrimental environmental impact from aquaculture, we're exporting that to other countries. Where is the morality in that? That is something that really, if we're going to approach the things that we do with a think globally, act locally framework, then we shouldn't be eating any farmed seafood. And yet doctors are telling us that we should be eating more seafood. It's got to come from farms. FAO is saying that by 2030, over 2/3 of the seafood that we eat will be farmed. And so it should. It probably should be more than that, Jay. That if we don't get more farmed seafood into the marketplace, the rising middle class in Asia is going to start to eat beef.
Well,
and that's going to be
suggests
horrendous in terms of the global warming impact. The nitrous oxide and the methane impacts on the atmosphere from beef production are horrendous. Mm-hmm. The Conservation International back in 2012 did a study doing life cycle assessment, which a life cycle assessment is the total environmental impact of an activity. They did a life cycle assessment on all of the various animal protein production systems: beef, pork, poultry, and aquaculture. And they concluded, this is Conservation International. This isn't some business-driven bunch of flunkies. These people are deeply dyed-in-the-wool green. Mm-hmm. And their conclusion was that, hands down, far and away, the least environmentally impactful animal protein production system was aquaculture. And so if we want to have any chance of controlling global climate change, we need to be reducing the amount of methane and nitrous oxide that comes from livestock
did the
production.
people who might otherwise object you know, to open ocean aquaculture on the west side of the Big Island. Did they buy into that? Have they accepted that? I mean, is it a settled matter now, or is there remnant resistance? I mean, what's the local feeling?
I think if you look at the evidence, Jay, that it's overwhelming. The Kampachi farm that's up here north of Keoholi Point has been in production now for almost 10 years. Mm-hmm. There has been no measurable environmental impact from that farm on the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. Nothing. It's directly offshore from where, and any evening, there are 10 to 12 dive boats there that are in diving on the reef. That's where the manta dives take place. And
I mean,
if tourist
boats.
Impact, tourist boats, yes, uh-huh. that are up there. And if there had been any impact on that reef there, we would have heard about it. Mm-hmm. But there's not. The secret of open ocean aquaculture, and it needs to be more widely publicized, is that as you move out into deeper water, further offshore, that you are able to use the wonderful assimilative capacities of the open ocean, that the nutrients from the metabolic waste from the fish and the feces from the fish, they aren't pollutants, because pollutants are where those things get concentrated. If you're out in the open ocean, they don't ever get concentrated. They get rapidly assimilated because it's a very nutrient-poor ecosystem out there.
So how far is your designated lease area, and how deep is it?
Well, sorry, just one clarification here. That's no longer our operation. That farm is run by Blue Ocean Mariculture.
Oh yes, I knew that. And the Blue Ocean bought that from you?
Yes. We 2008, 2009 were financially challenging times for us. You may recall that, Jay. There was that small little blip called the global financial crisis.
That one, oh yes.
And between that and the restrictive nature of or the restrictions that were put upon our company when we were trying to expand production, our investors had said, why are we trying to do this here? We weren't yet profitable because we were at such a small scale. We had, in 2008, we produced 500 tons of sashimi-grade Kampachi from that operation with no measurable impact on the environment. And that was through rigorous testing of the monitoring of the coral reef and testing of the water quality. And yet when we came to a public hearing and our environmental assessment to request for expansion, there were two people that had stood up and said, we don't think that you have enough data. One gentleman said, we don't think we had enough data. The other had said, you need to get a permit from the Kingdom of Hawaii for this.
Ah, that's helpful.
Those two gentlemen were given standing in a contested case against our expansion. And at that point, our board said, guys, why are we doing this? Come on. We've got a government down in Mexico that is encouraging us, that's begging us to come down and bring our hatchery technology down there and start to farm fish down there. The rest of the world needs more seafood. Why are we banging our head against this brick wall in Hawaii? That, Jay, is the real tragedy of what has happened here.
So where are we now, Neil?
The Blue
What's the
Ocean
situation?
Mariculture has still been operating that facility. They're back up to over 500 tons this past year. They've got extensive monitoring, still no measurable environmental impact, and they need to expand as well. And I'm no longer involved in Blue Ocean Mariculture. I know the people. I've followed closely what they're doing. They need to be able to expand that site there, and they should be allowed to.
Now, where do you fit? Is Kampachi Farms another entity? Is that yours? Is that a successor or to what you were doing before, or is it separate? Just describe the relationship between Kampachi Farms and Blue Ocean.
Well, Kona Blue Water Farms was the original company that had set up the operation here. And as there in 2009, 2010, we sold the hatchery and the offshore operation to Blue Ocean Mariculture, and my COO and myself out of Kona Blue Water Farms, we said we want to focus, we think that there is still a business here on focusing on the R&D here in Hawaii, and then taking this globally, taking the ability to culture this species to Mexico and to the Middle East and to Asia and to areas where there is recognition of the value of great tasting, healthful seafood, and an acceptance of the fact that we have to start to grow the seafood that we need, that we can't continue to just take it from the ocean.
So I take it you're doing R&D on this now in the thought of exporting it or setting up businesses elsewhere. Is that what it is?
We would, if there was an opportunity to pursue a commercially viable business here in Hawaii, we'd be glad to enter that realm again. But we see such tremendous opportunity globally, and we need to think of this globally, Jay, that seafood is the most internationally traded food commodity. In the U.S., it is the second most greatest import deficit after oil.
Well,
The
in
balance of
Hawaii
trade
itself,
deficit.
Hawaii is importing, how many billions of dollars of food, including seafood. You've made the point. And I wonder where you think this is going. I mean, if this created a problem, for the original Kampachi Farms, so much so that its founders, its entrepreneurs, got out of the business, or at least the operating side of the business. Then how are we going to achieve what is obviously our destiny? I mean, it should be our destiny to do open ocean aquaculture, at least on the west side of the Big Island and maybe elsewhere in the state, and feed our people quality protein, and for that matter, export quality fish.
It's our destiny, and it's both an ecological imperative, Jay, and it's also an economic opportunity.
Yes, and so the question I put to you is, what do we need to do now? What does the state need to do now? Make yourself governor, make me governor, whatever. We can both be governor. What would we do right now to make this happen for the benefit of the state?
I think there needs to be recognition that this industry is proceeding in it's being stifled by the inability for farms to get the permits that they need. And that whilst you need to have good regulatory oversight of farms, because it is the common property resource in the oceans, it is the public domain, that we need to be able to move forward with permits with a little more alacrity than what we have, and that there needs to be, where there are silly objections or just emotional objections to a farm application, that they should not be given standing to object to this.
Well, isn't this really a question of DLNR? You mentioned that Bill Isla, was supportive, but this has all happened on his watch. DLNR has allowed these objections to be made and treated as basis for contested case hearings. Can't this all be resolved?
Clarification, Jay. It wasn't. Sorry, Jay. Clarification. That wasn't on Bill Isla's watch. The 2008 environmental assessment, that was a contested case. That was prior to Bill being the chairman of DLNR.
Okay, but I'm okay. But moving on, though, my point is, I mean, can't all of this be handled simply within DLNR? I mean, it controls the regulatory process. It decides. Its officers and officials decide what happens in a contested case and what happens in the process of granting the permit. And the permits we're talking about really is the lease itself. Can't it all be controlled within DLNR?
Well, no. There are multiple permits that are required. You also need to get Army Corps of Engineers permits for any structure that is deployed into navigable waters. You need to get an EPA permit for what they call the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, as if what comes off a fish farm is a pollutant. They're not pollutants, Jay. They're nutrients. But that's what they call the permit. You need to get coastal zone management compliance, and so that's from the State Office of State Planning. But the primary lead for state waters, yes, that is DLNR. We have also been pursuing the federal permitting opportunity here and pushing on the federal regulatory structure. We think that there is opportunity here beyond state waters. The state jurisdiction extends out to the 3 mile line. And we have, since 2011, we've been testing what was initially an unanchored cage. It was the world's first untethered cage, the Velella beta test. And this was an aquapod, submergible aquapod pen with 2,000 Kampachi in it that drifted out around in the back of the Big Islands between 3 and 75 miles offshore for an 8-month period. And it showed just phenomenal biological performance of the fish. The growth rate, the feed conversion ratio, and the survival of those fish was just unprecedented.
So if you were governor, I mean, a governor does not control the federal process, and I certainly I agree that the federal process is definitely part of the delay here. Sometimes the delay is extraordinary. But if you were governor, what would you do to move things ahead with, I love the word alacrity?
I'm not sure of the precise decision-making process as to who gives standing in a contested case hearing, or how an environmental assessment is pushed into an environmental impact statement. But that's the critical nub here, that it is easy to kill a project if you want to here in this state, to just stand up and say, I want to go to a contested case, and you're just essentially poking a stick into the bicycle spokes, and you bring the process to a halt. And people are given standing for what are extremely tenuous reasons or just silly reasons. And so there needs to be more, I think, objectivity brought to that. That if a complaint against a project proposal should show reason why it's given standing.
Fair enough.
You don't want to completely override the process. You do want to make sure you've got rigorous oversight there. But let's bring some science to bear. The operation here, off Cair Hawley Point, has done 500 tons a year with no measurable environmental impact. If you site these farms properly, deep water, further offshore, then it doesn't have an impact. And at some point it will. As you grow this industry, you're going to have an impact. Let's manage that. Let's model it and then manage that growth, rather than at the moment what we have is just a stifled.
It's absolutely worth the effort, because we have, as you said, a destiny in this whole enterprise. And not only can we feed ourselves, but we can create world famous protein and distribute it everywhere, and it's all good, and it's not going to hurt anybody. Okay, Neil Sims, open ocean aquaculture entrepreneur, here on ThinkTech Talks, talking about the new direction in ocean aquaculture. I sure hope it all happens, and I look forward to talking with you again, Neil, to check in and see the progress in what could be one of the most important industries in our state. Thanks so much.
You're most welcome, Jay. Thank you very much, and aloha.
Aloha.